park. It's like, great, it's old growth, it's accessible, but is it protected? So I called the state park office, talked to a lovely person, is, the forest protected from logging? Oh yeah, definitely, it's protected from logging. Okay, yeah, so we moving along, and then it's like, well, how is it protected from logging? And we'd like to see some regulation or some paperwork or something, and then there's kind of radio silence for a while, you don't hear anything, and we're following back up, and it turns out that it is not protected from logging. So this forest cannot be in the old growth forest network yet. And this is the type of thing we're learning by creating the old growth forest network and by actually looking at what's protected and what's not. People assume that state parks are protected from logging, but only 8 states have truly protected their state parks. And Washington doesn't have that layer of protection on their state parks. So this is a sort of thing that, we can't be everywhere and do everything. We're still a small organization, although we get support, but I bring it to your attention in case this is something that you may want to do. And Maryland also, our state parks are not protected from logging, and it's something that I would love to do one of these days, but in the meantime, there was this old growth forest, 14 acres, right? But the biggest one left in my region, and I really wanted it to be in the old growth forest network. It was recognized as an old growth forest. It was managed by the state park system. But I didn't think I was going to be able to get the whole bill through to protect all the state parks, so I thought, well, I'll start small. And last year, we put in this bill, submitted this bill, that whenever the Department of Natural Resources identifies an old growth forest on state conservation land, the land shall be managed in a way that prohibits logging. And that went through. So now this forest is called Schoolhouse Woods, is in the old growth forest network, and we have these wonderful dedication celebrations where we hike through the forest. But I'm a school teacher. I taught university. I'm really not that well versed in politics, but I just got people to help me, and I saw what was the right thing to do. So we're really making a difference. The other thing that's going on here now with this strangely like war thing with the timber industry is something called the Young Forest Initiative, and this might be a lot bigger in the East and in the Midwest, but it's got a lot of money behind it. And it's this coalition of the hunting organizations with the forestry organizations, and they're saying, well, I know, instead of telling them we're cutting for money or this reason or that reason, we'll tell them we're cutting for the animals. We'll call it wildlife habitat improvement, increase young forest cover, all these different names they give it. But really, it's to clear the forest so these birds that are hunted, that like cleared areas, will be more abundant, so then they can be killed, like woodcock and grouse and quail. And we all have different feelings about hunting. I don't have huge problems with it. I'm not a hunter at all myself, but I say, let's not cut our forests on public land to create openings for animals that are just then going to be killed. It just makes no sense, because so many of these other organisms we're talking about, like the salamanders and the snails and everything else, will die because of that. So what do we do about that? Okay, this is one of these cuts in New Jersey. This is going on right now, state wildlife management area. These oak trees are 100 years old. It was an intact, very large forest, and they're poking holes in it for this Young Forest Initiative, because there's a lot of government money behind this. very frustrating, and so our response has been to write a scientific paper pointing out the problems with this and the history behind it. So if you want to send an email, there's that address down there. Send an email, I'll send you a copy of this paper. It's a freely accessible paper, and it's been making the rounds and really making a difference. So these are some of the messages we're coming out with. No cutting for young forests. We've got to make it simple for people. Also, this was a hot topic, literally, right? Fire prevention, wow. So Nature's Temples, this is the second edition of it. This is revised and expanded. In the first edition, I didn't have anything about fire. I felt like I wasn't really educated on that. I wasn't really going to attempt that. But for this one I did, and I dove in and I read lots and lots and lots of research on it. And what I learned was there's no easy answers. If you hear people tell you that, oh, if we thin the forest and do prescribed burning, that it's going to prevent forest fires coming into the community, everything I read from researchers I trust says that that is not true. And in fact, the research shows that the highly protected forests, like the wilderness areas and the parks, the very protected forests, are the ones that are least likely to burn. And a lot of these forests spread actually faster through the industrially managed forests that are younger and thinner. And if you are interested in doing more research on this yourself, I would suggest this book called Smokescreen by Chad Hansen. And his research shows the more trees pulled out of a forest, the more quickly and intensely a fire burns. And so these massive newer fires, it's really a result of our climate weirding, is what we're finding. These droughts combined with the winds that are spreading these sparks, quarter mile. And a lot of these fires are really going house to house more than through the forest. Okay, so back to politics again. So Biden, last Earth Day, said within 1 year of the date of his executive order, he asked his federal agency to complete an inventory, to define, identify, and complete an inventory of old growth and mature forests on federal lands. He made this proclamation in Seward Park, which is where we're going tomorrow at 10 a.m. Yay! I'm sure. And everybody's invited to that if you want to go. So this was really exciting for us to hear this, because it's like, oh my God, a president is talking about old growth forests. Like, our work is making a difference. It's getting to the top. I feel like, we've all reached this point. And then it was also interesting because the agencies have taken it very seriously, and they immediately start reaching out to us and say, like, okay, where's the, share your inventory with us. And we're like, we don't have an inventory of where the old growth is left in the country. Like, you guys had a long time, you're not working on that? No, nobody had an inventory of where the old growth forests were that were left. So, I know, unbelievable. But meanwhile, they're cutting down some of these old growth forests. But some other researchers, Dominic Della Sala being one, working with international people using LIDAR, using satellites, using carbon measurements, they have just completed an inventory of mature and old growth forests. And that's all being shared with the federal government. And so notice, so it was Earth Day last year. That means Earth Day this year is like next week. Any day now, he's going to come out with what the results of this were. So all of us are gearing up in the forest saving community, and we're working together. We're in beautiful coalitions, all supporting each other, and we're all like, I'm getting goosebumps. It's all just like, oh, we're all ready to we're all, saying to him now, and you all can too, right now, you can email him tonight or call him up if you know him and be like, we need an executive rule to say that any old growth forest on federal land will not be cut. It'll be protected. Yes. So that's what we're all going toward, and we're very excited to hear what's going to happen. In the meantime, what's been happening this year is that the forest cutting projects that were already on the list, they were moving forward. Just so many of them. This is just a couple of them. We came up with a list of 10 of these atrocious cuts that are planned to happen, and the one planned for Oregon called the flat country, what's that word there? Timber sale, flat country timber sale, that was it. The folks in Oregon got really active and, back to the 60s or 70s or 80s, whatever this protest was in front of the Forest Service office, and the Forest Service stopped that sale. And so I think, yes, I'm hopeful, but I think there's change happening at the top too. And I think they're getting it when they see what's happening to our environment. So this was the old thing, business as usual. By next week, it's all going to change, right? These public forests the old, mature and old growth should be held as a strategic carbon reserve. And we need to do this together, right? It's going to take a lot of us. If a lot of us put pressure on the government, and we show them we care, then it will happen. So, in addition to building a network of forests, I like to think that we're building a network of people who are all going to work together and stand for the forests. And that's the end of my presentation.
Hello, everybody. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion of this event. If you have a question and would like to ask it in person, you can feel free to line up right here at this mic. If you want to ask it digitally, you can scan the QR code that will pop up on the screen pretty shortly. We've got a couple of virtual questions already, so I'll kind of get the ball rolling by asking a few of those while people line up. With the changing ecosystems, how are the old growth forests evolving?
It's not an easy time for the old growth forest, right? I mean, just look at the sequoias. So many of them are being burned in these fires, so we've shrunk the range by logging them, and now we've changed the climate, and now they're burning. So it makes anything that's left even more precious. Yeah.
Have you had any conversations with our state land commissioner?
Yeah.
Would you have time to do that before you left?
I haven't had any conversations yet with the state land commissioner here. One of the things that is a challenge for us is because it's a national project that, there's...
We have to start somewhere.
Yeah, and so we need...
Does she have your book?
That would be wonderful if you'd like to share it with her. Yeah.
Another virtual question. You mentioned that the trees that are lost due to managing the forests, is this primarily management by the Forest Service or private companies? And how much percentage-wise are old growth forests on private property?
I'll start with the last one. How much percentage of old growth on private property? We have no idea, really, because it's private property, and you can't go there. And so I like to educate people on how to identify old growth forests, just in case they happen to have some on private land, then they know they have something special. But I've also seen, and it's heartbreaking, people that have old growth forests that just want the timber income and cut it, even if they know what they have. And the first part of the question was
It was, how much is the management of forests primarily with the Forest Service or with private companies?
So, it's both, it's all of that, you know, so usually what happens, so where I live in Maryland, we have state forests, and the state foresters will say, oh, we're gonna cut these stands this year. They don't cut it themselves, the Forest Service doesn't cut it themselves, they'll contract it with a private company. So those private companies could be cutting on public land, or they could be cutting on private land. But the decisions are made by the forest manager.
Okay, this is a bit of a cheat. I have 2 questions.
Okay.
First, I think Susan Sinnard has talked about how she's had some conversations with timber companies who are at least curious about some of her research. I'm wondering, do you see any signs of hope as far as any changes from timber companies as far as some of this type of stuff in, you know, paying attention to how forests are cut, et cetera? And then the second question, we talked right before this about how Richard Powers, writing the book The Overstory, reflected in a couple of podcasts on how his work has changed him. Super high level, how would you say your work has changed you?
Well, my work, so I'm only starting with the second question, I'll forget the first one again. I feel like my work was given to me, really. I was, from the time I was really small, I loved plants. I was just, you know, fascinated by them, connected to them. And I didn't have a mentor. Everybody thinks, oh, yeah, you know, your kindly grandmother taught you all about plants. No, nobody knew anything about plants in my family. I had to learn from the ground up, and then just more that I studied and the larger plants I got interested in. So, you know, and even the idea for the Old Growth Forest Network, I don't think that came from here. I think that came from somewhere else, and I'm just, like, I'm speaking for the trees in a way. You know, we're all connected. The trees are connected to each other by mycelia. We're connected, and we're all connected to them too. So that's, so how did that change me? I don't know. I think I am a part of that ecosystem. And the first question was about the, is there a change? Yeah, well, some people are doing things they call old growth silviculture, where they will take a forest that's already been cut and it's trying to grow back, and they say, oh, well, if we do these things, then it'll be kind of like an old growth forest. In other words, we'll cut trees and we'll leave them laying there, or we'll cut a hole in it, or we'll chop off a limb, or we'll, you know, make a gap, because they understand that those are the structural things that are important. But it's not the same as an old growth forest. An old growth forest just takes time. And so lately, this is my newest thing I've come up with, is you can't cut your way out of this problem. They always want to, still it's management. We'll do something to fix it. No, you just have to, the earth knows what it wants to do, right? The earth will heal it. We just have to give it some time. And I know that I'm not saying like, oh, leave every single thing alone. No, we need some fiber, you know, but we've destroyed enough of the forests that I almost feel like some of those forests can just be the crop forests. We'll just keep getting our fiber from them. But the ones that are still relatively healthy, we should let them go and recover and stay the way they are. Thank you.
How resilient is the social network in a forest when older trees are harvested?
There's that word resilient, like does that even have a definition? You know, that's what I'm saying. And you'll hear this a lot coming up, you know, through the forest industry. Resiliency, we have to cut for resiliency, and they'll even use climate change as an excuse. Oh, climate's changing, we need to make the forest more resilient for climate change, so they're gonna do that by cutting the forest. So, I think that, you know, if you take some older trees out of a forest, maybe we wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at it, but we have no idea what the repercussions are within that forest. It's kind of like, you know, your family, if somebody, if, you know, some claw came down and picked up your uncle, removed him, and somebody said, well, how's the family doing? Now, and he's like, I don't know, they look like they're still doing fine and it didn't affect them, but maybe it did. And the other thing about, back to the carbon, 50% of the carbon storage in a forest is done by the largest 1% of the trees. So if we take out the largest 1% of the trees, we're removing 50% of the carbon storage. So those big old trees are important. And there's papers about this. We're losing large trees across the planet, which is really sad. You know, so our shifting baselines.
From what?
Everything. From us cutting them, from diseases, from the fires, from storms, just from everything. We're losing the trees. Yes.
So, kind of tying in what you're just talking about and trying to quantify that idea of resilience, how long does it take for a forest to reestablish itself as an old growth forest? What's the time frame?
Well, we can't say scientifically, you know, because there are no papers on that because we haven't been doing that research for long enough. There's a question, does the forest ever actually recover from a clear cut all the way? We don't know that. And some of the people that study the wildflowers, even after 300 years, they've not seen the full amount of diversity come back. And so they're saying it never fully recovers. And then I think it depends on what forest type you're talking about. Like in the east, by the time the forests are left alone, about 150 years, you get that structure again, and you get some big old trees. And then by 250 or 300 years, you feel like the cycle is going. So some big old trees are dying, they're rotting, the new ones are coming up. It feels like it's old growth again. But if you're in a redwood forest or a Doug fir forest, 150 years isn't anything. You probably have to wait 500 years or 1,500 years to get that cycle going.
Why is so much forest management based on faulty or inaccurate or maybe not progressive information?
That is an excellent question. And I ask myself that too, because foresters aren't bad people. They went to forestry school because they like being in the woods. They like nature, and they're like, what do I like to do? Well, I like being in the forest. I know, I'll be a forester. But then when they come out, by the time they come out, my friend Bob Leverett, he's a big tree guy, he says it brainwashes them. I don't know, if you look at the textbooks, there are these, they have these stocking stands, you know, only so many, you measure the trees and you figure out how many trees can be in this area, and then anything more than that is bad. So, there's the why, and then there's what we can do about it, right? And so what we're trying to do about it is we got a grant, a $500 grant from this organization I mentioned at the book group, the Plan Initiative, to send one copy of each of my books to all the forest, well, not to all my books, but the new book to the forestry schools. So we're hoping that gets to the ecology, the forest ecology teacher, hoping that person of any would be the most enlightened, the most sensitive, and that maybe that person would then want to use it for their classes. Because these students, sometimes you go through forestry school, they've never even seen an old growth forest, or they're not taught about them. But hopefully that's where we're going to see the change in the schools.
All right, we've got time for
Yeah,
one more
one more.
virtual and then one more in person. In second growth and younger forests, have there been new species that enter those forests? And has the biodiversity of a forest evolved with the new growth?
Wow, that's a hard one. Normally, when you cut, you lose species. And the more times you cut, the fewer species you'll have there. So the cutting usually dumbs them down, if you put it that way. But on the other hand, the climate's changing. It's always been changing, right? You know, so it's been hotter, it's been colder here. And so trees do migrate. They do move around slowly, but we need to give them space to do that. And we do see some, we do see that they are still migrating. And they're still evolving, right? That's the other part. I talked about the long history of forests, and that the forests we have now weren't the same species that we had millions of years ago. So we need to leave these forests alone so the next new species can evolve too. It's hard for us to think in that long term, but that's the way I think about it. Is it a positive question? Can we end on a positive note?
You just asked me the same question. I think it is. So I can probably speak for a handful of people, or maybe most people in here, who are looking for stories of hope. I'm wondering if you have recommendations as far as fiction and poetry, or even nonfiction, stories that are your favorite in which trees are central, the central focus, the central plot, etc. So building on Richard Powers' book, The Open Story, what are the recommendations you have for us?
You know what came to my mind when you said that? Baron in the Trees. Has anybody ever read that one? It's an Italian novelist. You would love that one. What else?
American Canopy.
American Canopy. That was very depressing though, wasn't it? But it's a very good book of the history of the forests in this country and how quickly we took them out. And I hope people will read my first book, Teaching the Trees. It's very short, it's light, and I still like it. It's still my favorite. Okay, I'll end on that.
Thank you so much, Joan, for being part of Rebecca again. Thank you so much, Joan, for being here. If you had a question that we didn't get to, Joan will be signing over at the book table. Otherwise, have a great rest of your night, everybody.
Thank you. Nice to chat with you.
Have fun.
Thank you.